I'm from the projects, on welfare, foster homes. My mother was a single mom struggling with 3 small kids, and she struggled, financially, and she also struggled with schizophrenia. And eventually, they came and took us away, locked her in a mental institution, and I spent the rest of my childhood pretty much in foster homes. My father had gone to prison by the time I was 3. So I suppose you can say I don't have a fancy pedigree. I'm from the streets. Growing up, the first man I looked up to was the mailman because, he brought our welfare check. And when I was a little kid and I was hungry, I thought, what better could you be than to be the guy who comes through and makes everybody happy? The mailman was just this white guy. Never knew my name, never knew me, but I would have followed him off the face of the earth because I thought what he did every month was magic. I remember being a kid and having questions in my mind, 5, 6 years old, as I was looking up to this mailman and being like, why do we have to be hungry if there's so much food in the store? Tracy Chapman, she asked the question the best. She asked, why do the babies starve when there's enough food to feed the world? There's actually children, dying, giving up to ghosts, but there's enough food to feed the whole world. And the answer to that question, people always throw out something to do with economics and money. My thirst to answer that question growing up, my hunger as a child, I think, drove my hunger as an adult for knowledge and understanding of money. So it's always been something that has fascinated me, even from childhood. And I felt like in order to avoid that pain, I needed to understand it. So in many different ways, I studied it. I left the foster home sworn at 17. I left at 18. For the Army. I was a paratrooper at Fort Bragg, but even when I was a paratrooper at Fort Bragg, I was so fascinated with money that, when I got off work, a long day as an airborne radio repair technician, I would get off and I would go get in my little car and I would deliver pizzas at night right back onto the base where I was a soldier at, and just hustle, trying to get money, trying to put something together because I always felt that maybe if I work really hard, I would be able to get somewhere, but that didn't really work either. So then I started to apply my mind to other things. I started trying to learn about how to create wealth, and I joined, companies like Amway, and I started selling soap, whatever I could do there. And then I joined another company called Primerica. I became a licensed life and health insurance agent when I was like 20 years old. Baby face trying to sell people life insurance. I thought maybe, this might be the ticket. But as I continued to study and try different things, I developed my knowledge, I developed my understanding in little ways. I learned a little something from this, a little something from that. Even the things that I failed at, I actually benefited because I kept learning little bits and pieces about this whole wealth strategy game and how it will work, and learned about finance and learned about money. Eventually, I got out of the military. I did my 4 years and honorably discharged. I moved on, but I was still trying to figure out how to get my life together. I had gone back home and I was working sort of a dead-end data entry job, trying to figure out what my next step was going to be. And then the Million Man March happened. And I came down to Washington, D.C., saw all these beautiful black people down here celebrating being black or being upward mobile. And I saw black professionals in numbers I had never seen before, really. And I was inspired to move to the district, and I moved to Washington, D.C. And when I got here, I had always heard about and learned about Howard University. That first summer, I was a street musician in Georgetown playing on the corner. Eventually, I applied to Howard University, and by the grace of God, I was accepted and became a student there in the School of Business. still driven by that childhood hunger. I was able to go to Howard University. My military benefits helped me out with that immensely. I started to learn, I started to grow, started to develop and come to my own as a person who understood a little bit about business, who understood something about finance. Over the course of 4 years at Howard, I developed more and more understanding of business, but I also started to run my own businesses. I did entertainment booking and event planning. I was a saxophonist, so I started doing events, learning about the actual interworkings of business, grew, developed in that. It was a good experience for me. I had my daughter towards the end of my college years, bought my first home, bought another home, was able to fulfill kind of my dream, which was to go back and move my mom out of the ghetto, and I bought up my second home in my hometown back up in Utica, New York, and moved my mother to the good side of town, to the north side of town where all the fancy people live. So I thought I was getting it together, and I thought I had some things going on, but there's a lot more that was coming for me. Towards the end of college, and I had my daughter, and I had a couple houses, and I had a lot of bills. I was working full time, I was in school full time, and I really wasn't doing well in school. My grades started to suffer. I was spread really thin. Eventually, my senior year, I dropped out. I stopped. I felt like, hey, I'm making more money than some of my teachers. I got a couple homes, supporting my family. I'm working hard. I really don't need this paper. I made a big mistake and went and left without completing my education. Feeling like I had a certain level of education in kind of the school of hard knocks that I had come up in, but I was still doing well. I became elected to a public office. I had my own business that I started, had a lot of things going on, and construction company I owned 50% of. I had a real estate consulting firm, and I started taking on investments from people and managing investments. Really, I had an idea and concept, kind of got in over my head, I suppose, and ultimately, in those 4 years I was doing well, but eventually things came crashing down. I guess I could say its problem started when I got a letter from the Securities and Exchange Commission about some monies that I had taken on, management, promises I had made to return, massive amounts of money because I was young and full of hubris and, really believed in what I was doing. And ultimately, they brought me in, they were suing me for $1.4 million. And I was kind of blew it off. I think, believe it or not, I just was under so much pressure. Right at that point in my life, I didn't really understand the gravity of the situation. And what started out as a civil suit, the Securities and Exchange Commission suing me for money, became federal criminal case, which the DOJ prosecuted me for fraud. I fought it tooth and nail. I went to trial, tried to defend myself, tried to explain myself, and I failed miserably at that. In the end, I was convicted of a federal fraud statute and multiple, and went to prison for 8.5 years. They brought 2 cases against me at the same time before it was all over. 8.5 years I did in prison on a 10-year sentence. $800,000 roughly I was assessed for restitution and fines. Let go of my children, and then I lost a lot. Lost everything really, and just went through it. People think about 8.5 years is a long time for a man, an adult, to be locked away from society. I spent over 3,000 days consecutively in federal prison. And 3,000 days, you got a lot of time to think. You got a lot of time to kind of process, to look back at all you've been through, all you've seen and done, and kind of consider what's left of your little life. Life is so short. Wisp smoke, and you make decisions and end up with calamitous results. And there I was sitting in federal prison and looking back at everything that had transpired in my life. There were people who had lost money with companies that I owned. I had lost more money than anybody else. My children, I just, you think about what's your purpose? Why are you here? Crazy as it seems, I'm sitting there in prison, and I decided maybe there's a way that I can figure out how to give back. At my first sentencing, I remember the prosecutor, I was the first time nonviolent offender, and they asked for about 24 and a half years for my prison sentence. I thought that was a long time, and I was paying attention to the prosecutor at my sentencing, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, "Your Honor, this man has such a high level understanding of banking and finance that he's a pecuniary danger to society." And I didn't really even understand what pecuniary meant, and I was like, whoa, I looked that up, and it was really talking about financial. He described me as a financial danger to society because I had such a high level understanding of banking and financing. And so I kind of thought there with myself, does it mean that I have to be a pecuniary danger just because I know a lot? Maybe if I know a lot, I could be a great benefit to society. Maybe if I was able to share the things that I know in a way that could help people, I don't have to be a danger. So I thought about that, how could I take my knowledge, take the understanding I had accumulated over the years and had ultimately got me into trouble and had ultimately hurt some people, good people, and how can I parlay that into benefits to society? When I got to my first federal prison, I decided to teach a class. And so I developed a curriculum and started teaching about real estate, finance, and just the fundamentals as I understood them. And I remember my first class, I had 30 people in the class, 30 inmates, and these were guys from the streets. These were guys who had come up in the school of hard knocks like me, but they hadn't developed this understanding that I had. It was really foreign to them, but they were eager. They really wanted to learn. You figure all these guys in prison, they're just sitting around and playing tabletop games and trying to stab each other, but really there's a lot of real people in there who just lost their way somehow, made the wrong mistakes, wrong people, wrong situations, and then they found themselves in this locked away from society and still trying to figure out what to do with their lives just like me. So I started teaching the fundamentals of finance and real estate, and so the way I taught was to give them information and then ask questions that required they understand what I said in order to answer. And so in that way, I knew that everybody in my class really understood what it is I was teaching, not just kind of looking and nodding their heads, but if you couldn't answer the question, my attitude was I must not be a good teacher, so I would double back. Long story short, a lot of the guys really learned. They all developed in their understanding, and they got excited, and they told other people about the class. And so after 10 weeks was over, and it was time to sign up for another class, I agreed to teach again. I'll never forget the day of that sign up. I'm in the prison with 1,500 inmates, and there's only 30 slots in my class. The hallway in the education building had a line that was 3 strands long. It came from the door and it went back. It came back. Then it went down 2 flights of stairs in the prison, down 2 flights of stairs and out the door to the corner of the building. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how many people were thirsty for understanding. Street guys, hood guys, the guys that people counted out and figured they couldn't learn and didn't want to learn and didn't want to understand. These guys were literally inside a prison, lined up, and right then and there, I knew. I said, man, this is something. There's a need here. There are people who really do want to understand whether the world gets it or not. There are people who really want, and I think they deserve to understand. And if I ever get a chance, I'm going to take these lessons straight to the street. I'm gonna give it to them because I know that they have a true desire and a need for it, and probably will be impacted and benefit from it more than anybody else. And they've been counted out, and a lot of them are down. I started to conceive on what is now becoming the Hall Street Journal. That's kind of where the idea started. And I taught another course, and then I got moved to another prison, and I taught another course. But eventually I started to realize, hey, I can't just keep teaching courses. What I need to do is develop a system, develop a course that I can duplicate. And instead of teaching 30 people, maybe I could reach 30 million people if I just create the program and package it, write the book, put together the seminar series, create a product where lots of people can benefit from it. At the same time, I felt like it needed to be more than just a product. We needed to have a forum. We needed to have a place where we can have an ongoing conversation, because, if people just learn from books, then we send all the college students in the library and just leave them. If you really want to be transformed, you got to renew your mind. And if you're going to renew your mind, you need a teacher. And you become a student, and being a teacher and becoming a student, you also have to have a forum. You come to class. And so I felt like Hall Street Journal needed to be a destination that people could come to and just learn. And I don't have to be a guru and know about everything. My goal was to simply be a fantastic facilitator of the conversation, and I think that's what a good teacher is. And also someone who could relay, high concepts or things that seem high concept and keep it simple. The greatest teacher ever, in my opinion, is Jesus Christ. And I remember that, when he spoke and he taught eternal divine principles, he didn't talk like the Pharisees and Sadducees and the Sanhedrin. He spoke in everyday terms. He talked to fishermen about fishing. He talked to farmers about farming. He talked to shepherds about shepherding sheep. He spoke in terms that everybody understood. And what we needed to do to understand finance was not to get it in these terms that distance everybody, but to get it in terms that bring people in, that help people understand, that don't make people feel like stupid or something. Because, you say, I just bought 100 contracts of Qualcomm. It's been consolidating for 5 weeks and it just broke out on strong volume. What are you talking about? Nobody knows what you're talking about. And so all the places where people go to learn about money, how can you learn? You got to learn to speak the language before you can understand what anybody's saying. And I felt like I wanted Hall Street Journal to be different than that. I wanted to speak in terms that everyday people understood, so I wouldn't lose people, and no one will be left behind at Hall Street. So that was really and truly important to me. So I try to keep everything simple. Even if I use a term that someone hasn't heard before, I always want to make sure that we break it down. And again, that's why I'm not just trying to put out a product. I want to create a forum where we have blogs and we have conversations and we can exchange information and ideas, and where the public can say, hey man, I don't get that. If someone is talking about Japanese candlestick charting techniques to do technical analysis on the stock portfolio, I want people to be like, okay, it sounds like something far away, but it really it's not, and I can learn it and I can understand it. Hall Street, break it down. So that's what Hall Street is all about. For those things that you think are far away, and I found that it really wasn't that complex. I found that it wasn't so far away as people believed it is, or it sounds like it was. So, when people come to Hall Street, it's really about learning. It's not about showing off and demonstrating what we understand. It's about really just sharing ideas and sharing information. On January the 1st, I'm out of prison. Thankfully, I've done a lot of writing, and I've done a lot of studying. I've done a lot of preparation. I feel like this is why I was born. This is why I grew up the way I did, because it allows me to relate to people who have been kind of left outside the discussion of wealth strategy. And that hunger I had as a child has fueled my knowledge as an adult. My sincere desire to share is what's driving me here. What is Hall Street? Hall Street is a place where people can come and develop and learn and grow. What is our mission? To educate, to edify, to enlighten, to entertain. It's good that we get inspired and we get inspiration, but we need more than just inspiration. What we need today is information. We got to have understanding. If you want to be transformed, you have to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And if you're going to renew your mind, you need new ideas. You need new information. You need to become a student and find a teacher. And your teacher is Hall Street. It's where the real talk happens. It's where the real development happens. It's not enough to say you need to get your finances in order. What does that mean? How do I do it? What are the steps that I take? What are the fundamentals of finance? Expenses, assets, liability, cash flow, net worth. How do we break that stuff down? What's coming in? What's going out? What do you own? What do you owe? When you compare what's coming in to what's going out, what's left? That's your cash flow. We need to learn the fundamentals. What about all of the other aspects of finance? What about estate plannings? Why should we be even concerned about estate plans? Why should we care about various forms of insurance? Why does the stock market matter? How many of us have been, all our lives, we've seen every news program, every newspaper. You've never picked up a major newspaper on any day ever or seen any significant or major news broadcast. You've never seen a news broadcast that did not talk about what's going on in the stock market, and yet we don't understand any of it. At what point do we stop using the stock page of the newspaper to wrap fish and clean glass? There's more to the stock pages than that, people. Hall Street, you got to understand, if it's important enough for them to put on every news broadcast and in every newspaper you've ever seen, that is important enough for you to understand it. But we have not understood it, and Hall Street is going to change that. We're going to pull back the cloak. We're going to make sure that we can dig down deep. We don't have to be afraid. It's normal and natural to be afraid of things that you don't understand and to distance yourself from things that you don't understand. But if you come to Hall Street Journal, that is going to change. That is going to change. Your understanding is going to be changed. That is our mission. We are here to break down barriers, and not just for you, but for your children and your children's children. There are entire communities of people who have benefited from understanding finance from generation to generation. How long will we raise our children ignorant of finance and ignorant of business? It's got to end. And it's not just for the few who make it out, but it's for the masses who need to have a leg in. That's what this is about. We're not talking about Baldwin Hills. We're talking about kids from the hood, kids from the projects, kids who without information and understanding in many ways don't stand a chance to live the American dream. We're going to change that, and we're going to start them even when they're young. Hall Street baby bottles. I want little kids drinking out of Hall Street baby bottles, drinking not juice, but drinking knowledge and understanding and wisdom when it comes to our finance. And that's something that I know we need in the community that's underserved. The people who just simply don't get it, who don't get the lessons, who don't have the understanding. If you don't have a grandfather who could teach you about the stock market, how are you ever really going to learn? So that's what Hall Street is about, and I'm inviting you to just join us on the journey. I won't call it a destination. They say peace be the journey. We're gonna enjoy our journey as we move toward growth and understanding. How do we become financially free? Do we even understand the process? We have the actual formula at Hall Street for wealth and wealth strategy. It's mathematical. It's not a function of your opinion. Are you wealthy? Are you not wealthy? It's this mathematical condition. And if you don't understand it, how can you possibly achieve it? And so we want to bring those ideas. We have a course called the Principles. The Principles are all about giving you the fundamentals, the basics. If you don't have the basics, how can you possibly excel in a game, you gotta know the basics and the rule of any game that you play. You gotta understand capitalism. The other thing about Hall Street Journal is we don't just look at money. There's more to life than money. I know I've been talking about it a lot, and even though as a child I developed this kind of psychosis that it was all about money because I was hungry. But the reality is that there's more to life than money. What's the point of having money if your health is all messed up and you can't enjoy the things that you've earned? Then you also have your social life, your personal life, your family life. That's important. Your spiritual life, or your emotions. Sometimes you need inspiration. Sometimes you don't feel like getting out of the bed. And so we deal holistically. Hall Street's going to come from other angles, not just financial. Money and finance, health and fitness, news and politics. The business is so tied to politics. You got to follow the news if you're going to be effective in business. Family and relationships, that's another piece. We're going to cover so much at Hall Street, the entire person. That's our goal. And we just invite you to come out, check us out. And now, don't just come check us out. Participate in the conversation. There's nothing like having people who ask good questions when you're in the classroom. Those students who ask good questions always benefit the other students in the class. So we're hoping that you're going to be one of those students that comes to Hall Street and asks fantastic questions. And if we say something that doesn't make any sense or anything along those lines, we want you to come to us. We want you to take it straight to us, because this is not about us seeming like we know more than everybody else. This is about us bringing a powerful message, a transformational message to the world. Hall Street, Real Talk, in the building, 01/01/15. Yeah, Real Talk in the building. Save the date. We'll see you there.